Every Christmas, when families gather around a decorated tree, sparkling lights, hanging ornaments, the smell of pine filling the room, they are participating in a tradition that traces directly back to one woman. A queen. A queen whose face court painters were ordered to make lighter. A queen who hosted an 8-year-old musical prodigy in her private chambers. A queen who turned a house into the most photographed building on the planet. A queen who, according to some historians, carried African blood in her veins, hidden in plain sight for over 2 centuries. Her name was Sophia Charlotte of Mecklenburg-Strelitz, and the facts about her life are more extraordinary than anything Netflix could invent. Act 1. The Girl from Miro. No one expected she was born on May 19, 1744, in a place most Europeans had barely heard of. Mecklenburg-Strelitz was a tiny duchy tucked into the northern edge of Germany. Modest, provincial, considered unremarkable by the grand courts of Europe. Charlotte was the youngest daughter of Duke Charles Louis Frederick and Princess Elizabeth Albertine of Saxe-Hildburghausen. When her father died in 1752, leaving the family without its patriarch, 8-year-old Charlotte entered a childhood defined by quiet hardship and careful study. She learned music. She developed a deep passion for plants and natural science. She read widely and built the kind of intellectual depth that polished aristocrats with far greater resources rarely possessed. Nobody was watching Miro. Nobody expected anything from this minor German princess. Then a king needed a wife. When George III inherited the British throne in 1760, his advisors went searching across Europe for a suitable match. Their criteria were specific: Protestant, politically unthreatening, ideally unknown enough to have no foreign loyalties that might complicate British interests. Charlotte checked every box perfectly. What happened next defies imagination. An emissary arrived at her door. A proposal was made on behalf of a king she had never seen. She accepted. And just weeks later, 17-year-old Charlotte climbed aboard a ship bound for England, a country whose language she did not speak, whose king she had never met, and whose throne she was about to share. She arrived in England on September 8, 1761. That same evening, she married King George III. 6 hours after setting foot on English soil for the very first time, she was Queen of Great Britain and Ireland. 2. The question history has never fully answered here is the fact that has fascinated historians, geneticists, and cultural scholars for nearly a century. Was Queen Charlotte black? The question is not as simple as it sounds, and the answer is more complicated and more compelling than any definitive yes or no. The ancestry argument centers on a Portuguese noblewoman named Margarita de Castro y Sousa, a 15th century figure whose lineage some researchers trace back to Moorish ancestry through King Alfonso III of Portugal, and a woman named Madragana, who Portuguese sources describe as a Moor. Genealogist Mario de Valdes y Cocom spent years constructing a case that Charlotte was descended from this line, and that this African ancestral thread could be traced through not one, but potentially 6 different roots in her family tree. The evidence, however, divides historians sharply. Some point to contemporary descriptions of Charlotte's appearance, accounts that used the language of the era in ways that suggested non-European features. The word mulatto appears in the diary of a physician who encountered her toward the end of her life. Her own era noticed something. Yet mainstream academic historians largely push back. The genealogical distance between Charlotte and her alleged African ancestor spans 9 generations or more, making any meaningful biological inheritance essentially negligible by the time it reached her. Others argue that the word Moor itself was used loosely in medieval Portuguese records, describing North Africans, Arabs, and various non-Christian peoples without the racial specificity that modern readers project onto it. What makes this debate so electric is what surrounds it. Charlotte's own era appeared uncomfortable with her appearance. Court painters were, by various accounts, expected to soften how they represented her features. One painter, Scottish portraitist Alan Ramsay, a known opponent of slavery, consistently painted Charlotte in a way that her contemporaries described as the most honest likeness. His coronation portrait of the Queen was circulated to the colonies at the height of the anti-slavery movement. That choice, in that political moment, was not accidental. Buckingham Palace itself has never denied the ancestry claim. When pressed, a palace spokesperson was once reported to have said it was a matter of history, neither confirming nor closing the door. The House of Windsor has not denied it. Scholars have not proven it. And 2.5 centuries of official portraiture have left the question deliberately unresolved. What we do know is this: something about Queen Charlotte made her own century uncomfortable enough to manage her image with unusual care. And something about her story keeps drawing the world back to ask the question her own era refused to answer cleanly. Act 3. The house she made a palace. Here is a fact that will permanently change how you see one of the most recognizable buildings on Earth. When George III purchased Buckingham House in 1761, a private London property near St. James's Park, it was intended as a relatively quiet family residence, separate from the formal ceremonial life of the palace. Charlotte moved in around 1762, and from that point forward, she made it her own. She spent so much of her life there, raised so many of her children within its walls, and stamped it so completely with her personality and preferences that Londoners stopped calling it Buckingham House. They began calling it something else entirely, the Queen's House. It was eventually expanded, redesigned, and renamed Buckingham Palace. But its transformation from a private residence into the symbolic heart of the British monarchy began not with a king, but with a queen who made it home. Act 4. The 8-year-old. She changed forever. In April 1764, a child arrived at the royal court. He was 8 years old. His name was Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. His father Leopold had brought him on a grand tour of Europe, performing for courts and aristocrats across the continent. At each stop, the boy stunned his audiences with a musical ability that seemed to belong to a far older mind. Charlotte received them warmly. She was herself a trained musician. Her teacher was Johann Christian Bach, the 11th son of the great Johann Sebastian Bach. Music was not a social formality for Charlotte. It was a genuine love. Mozart performed for the Queen and the assembled court, sight-reading complex pieces at the keyboard without preparation. He and Charlotte played together. She sang an aria while he accompanied her. The encounter was, by all accounts, remarkable. The following year, Mozart dedicated his Opus 3, a collection of 6 sonatas published by his father, to Queen Charlotte. In the dedication, the 8-year-old composer described his feelings at the honor in terms that conveyed almost overwhelming gratitude. Charlotte rewarded the dedication with a gift of 50 guineas, a queen of possible African descent, nurturing the musical development of the man who would become the greatest composer in Western history. In the royal court of 18th century Britain, that single fact deserves to sit for a moment. Act 5. The Christmas tree and the flower named after her. Now come the facts that are hiding in plain sight. Every December, across Britain and across the world, the ritual of decorating a Christmas tree plays out in millions of homes. Most people credit Prince Albert, Queen Victoria's German husband, with popularizing the tradition in the 19th century. And he did popularize it, but he didn't start it. Charlotte did. In 1800, Preparing a Christmas celebration at Windsor for over 100 children from local families, Charlotte brought in a yew tree, placed it in a large tub in the center of the drawing room, and decorated it with candles, sweets, fruit, almonds, raisins, and toys. Each child left with a portion of those decorations as a gift. One guest wrote a detailed account of the scene. A teenage Princess Victoria, Charlotte's granddaughter, later recorded her own childhood delight at the royal Christmas trees she grew up with, trees that traced directly back to this tradition her grandmother had introduced. Charlotte brought Christmas trees to Britain. The world just forgot to credit her. Meanwhile, explorers and botanists of the era regularly brought Charlotte specimens from their travels. She was a serious amateur botanist who helped expand and enrich the collections at Kew Gardens. One discovery in particular earned a permanent tribute, a spectacular South African flower whose scientific name, Strelitzia reginae, translates simply as "of the Queen." Today, that flower is known around the world as the bird of paradise, an African flower, formally named in honor of a queen with possible African ancestry, still blooming in botanical gardens across the planet more than 2 centuries later. Act 6, a name stamped across the world. Charlotte died on November 17, 1818, at Kew Palace in Surrey, surrounded by several of her children. She had reigned as queen consort for 57 years, longer than any other woman in British history to hold that position. In that time, she gave birth to 15 children, 13 of whom reached adulthood. 2 became kings of Britain. 1 became Queen of Württemberg. Her descendants include Queen Victoria, King Edward VII, and every British monarch, through to the present day. But perhaps the most astonishing measure of her footprint is geographic. Charlottetown, the capital of Prince Edward Island in Canada, Queen Charlotte Bay in the Falkland Islands, Queen Charlotte Sound in New Zealand, Charlottesville in Virginia, and perhaps most significantly, Charlotte, North Carolina, one of the fastest-growing cities in the United States today, home to a major financial district, a thriving Black cultural community, and a statue of the Queen herself at its international airport. A city that carries her name, a city that doesn't know nearly enough about who she was. She changed what Christmas looks like. She helped shape Kew Gardens. She gave Buckingham Palace its identity. She mentored Mozart. She carried, possibly, an ancestral thread that the British establishment spent 2 centuries softening, managing, and never quite erasing. And for over 200 years, the world looked at her portraits and saw exactly what those court painters wanted them to see. The real Queen Charlotte was far more interesting than that. She always was.